portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, today, could we be seeing rapidly falling prices in our future? Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you have questions for me, I've got a place you can go for that. That's at prudentmoney.com. Go to the Ask Bob section and send me a question. Love to help you out however I can do so. And we can get your questions answered and take comments as well. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, I want to talk with you today about something that I think is extremely important on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, it's not always easy to understand. And I think that one of the bigger problems when it comes down to money is this general understanding of how things work. And this understanding of how things can get so bad in the stock market to where this thing called a bear market comes around and people lose quite a bit of money. Thus far in the 2022, this is what's been happening. Ironically, I believe that if you go back in January, I believe that the day was January 2nd. It's literally, or second or third, I can't remember, is literally the day that this bear market, the decline to this bear market started. It's been an odd one because typically when you get into a bear market, the three major stock market indexes, which is S&P 500, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and the NASDAQ, all kind of go in the same direction and are roughly the same percentage lost, if you will, during a certain time period. So if the Dow goes down 10%, the S&P 500 is down roughly 10%, 11% as well. The NASDAQ typically, historically, will drop a lot further because it's riskier than the main two stock indexes. So the odd thing about today is that the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ both have been in bear markets for quite a bit of time. It wasn't until this, I believe this week, that the Dow Jones Industrial Average crossed that line in the sand where it's in a bear market as well. And that's basically when the index loses greater than 20%. So there's a lot of odd things about it. I mean, actually this is historically is what you see in bear markets is that you go with a pretty big loss, which 25% loss, which is where we are. And then you see things come undone and then the real big losses start. So what's happening today is pretty congruent with history. But why is it happening? What risk is there? I mean, Wall Street is very complex, tough to understand, and at the same time, there are significant things occurring that I think that you need to know. The challenge for me, the challenge for anybody that's in financial media is the ability to communicate it. And what I want to challenge you with today is to hang in there with me, listen to what I have to say, and follow what makes sense, and maybe jot down, if you're not driving, jot down what doesn't make sense. Send me an email. I'll explain it the best that I can. The other thing that you can do is send me an email at info@prudentmoney.com or bob@prudentmoney.com, and I will send you my latest client letter. This is the letter that I write to my own clients, where I go into pretty big detail of what we're going to talk about today. And so I always find that the ability to study this by reading through it helps as well. So you got all these dynamics going on. You got a bear market happening. You've got a very concerning bear market going on in the bond market. Historically speaking, this is the worst year for bonds, I think, on record. People who are invested in bond funds as a choice of escaping from risk and investing into bond funds, well, that's was the original plan, and it's always worked mostly has worked in history. Not this time. Bonds have lost a tremendous amount of money. So we're in that rare situation where diversification between bonds and stocks just isn't there. So you don't have anything in your portfolio that really can help offset stock market losses. It is a very unusual period of time in correlation that probably only happened maybe 4% of the time. I ran these numbers at one point. I think it was like 4% of the time over history have we had a scenario where bonds and stocks both lost money. Of course, this happened in 2008 during the great financial crisis. But here is what I do know. I do know about stewardship. And I do have very strong feelings about what our responsibilities as a steward of what God has blessed us with is when it comes down to what's going on in 2022 and, as far as that goes, into 2023. One thing that you want to be careful about is getting drawn into the emotion, because in this type of environment, there's a lot of what I call gloom and doom advertisers and marketers that send out these tons of emails that paint the worst case scenario. And the problem is that they're all believable. Used to, you would read it and go, oh, that could never happen. Today you read it and go, oh, that probably could happen. And so that creates emotion. Poor decision making could be as a result of that emotion. And you got that dynamic too. And let me tell you, there's a lot of this gloom and doom marketing that is printed and sent out, disguised as legitimate information. Not to say that that their forecast may not happen. It's just that it's a 2%, 3% chance. So here is what I do know. And I get this from Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12. If you've been to any of my workshops, I always start off with this, because this is the exact same verse printed twice, two locations in the Book of Wisdom. Now, I've always felt like when God duplicates a verse in the Bible, that there's a significant amount of meaning that goes along with that. And we need to pay attention to it. When I see two verses separated by 5 chapters in the Book of Wisdom, Proverbs, that is something that should be getting all of our attention. And I've always referred to this as the verse of risk. It says, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Once again, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. the simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. There's a big difference between the word foresee danger, or the phrase of the two words of foresee danger, versus predicts danger, knows danger. I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball. And I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. And all we can do is take what the opinions of others, because nobody knows for a fact what's going to happen, regardless of what these people who say they've predicted every crash known to man and they're predicting one today. It's all an opinion. But in this verse, the verse says, foresees danger and takes precautions. So be aware of your environment. And I've always talked about this from the standpoint of risk is one of, I think, the great principles that comes from stewardship, that we are to be good risk managers. We may not understand every aspect of what's going on, but at some point, you've got to be able to look at what you're doing, understand it the best that you can, understand what's going on around you the best that you can, and pray that God shows you risk and shows you what to do. And really meditate on that. And this is one of the things I think we forget to do, is we forget to bring God into the conversation. We forget to pray. I'm as guilty of it as anybody. We don't want to be the simpleton in this verse. Goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So in the next half of the program, we're about to hit a break, I'm going to talk about what I see could potentially happen, and paint a road show you a road, and so that you can start to understand the risk. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. We're up against the break. Stick around. I will be right back.
The Word for Today is excited to announce the new official online home for the ministry of Pastor Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org. At pastorchuck.org, you'll have instant access to thousands of hours of verse-by-verse teaching by Pastor Chuck Smith from Genesis through Revelation, and full access to special messages on subjects such as prophecy and much, much more. Also at pastorchuck.org, a full library of great teachings by Kay Smith, and a section where you can read some of Pastor Chuck's books online, all free of charge. So visit the new official online home of the Word for Today and the ministry of Pastor Chuck and Kay Smith, pastorchuck.org.
Hi, I'm Jill Taylor, inviting you to join me each Saturday morning at 11 o'clock for Choose Life Radio. You'll hear people from across America sharing their stories of faith, forgiveness, redemption, and restoration. Choose Life Radio will encourage you to fully appreciate the gift of life. You may also find help for you or a friend in need. So please join me Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock right here on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Something good is about to happen. Bill Gaither and the Gaither Vocal Band are coming to Southlake at White's Chapel Thursday, October 13th. Get ready for legendary harmonies, laughter, and encouragement, all in one unforgettable night. Thursday, October 13th.
Like something good is about to happen.
Featuring special guests Lady Love Smith, Kevin Williams, and Gene McDonald. Coming to White's Chapel Thursday, October 13th. Tickets available now at gaither.com. Sponsored by Phil McGabb Concerts, a premier production.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I do appreciate it. I'm talking about where I think things are going. And hopefully we'll be able to get through this in the next 10, 12 minutes. The problem, now I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit. The problem all comes down to one thing: the need for money. And if there is a entity that needs money, they're desperate, they're in a situation where they've literally run out of money and they don't have any more. Or they're running low, they're down to just a couple of days of operating money and they're out of business. So they need someone to bail them out by providing money. 2008, the financial crisis, we saw the first signs of aggressive money printing, and the Federal Reserve Board, the central bank, the bank that controls everything about money in the United States and all the banks, have aggressively since then printed money and bailed out companies, corporations, you name it, they've bailed them out. Another word for it is called the lender of last resort. It's the last place in the world you go to get money. Lehman Brothers was probably the second or the first biggest investment bank in the world. They ran out of money. And there's a lot of reasons why it happened, but we'll just stick to the end result. They ran out of money, and the Federal Reserve Board and the government decided not to bail them out. They went under, they were no more, and they almost brought the financial system down with them. Today, we are in this same situation. Companies, the bond market, are all on borrowed time. They're running into a situation where they can't get money. The Bank of England, which is like our Federal Reserve Board, had to inject money into the bond market as it went towards a crisis, a potential market crisis today. This is what we woke up to. The Bank of England printing money, basically, and giving it to the bond markets there. Because a crisis in the bond market is what I think that every central bank is, like our Federal Reserve Board, every country's got a central bank that they're trying to avoid. So that is a problem. I think that we've seen a lot of aggressive money printing this year, bailing out aspects of the bond market. All this is going on. How long does it work, and at what time do we have a problem? Your guess is as good as mine. But you got to know that is the underlying foundational problem that we are facing. Now, you have to understand. I want to give you go through a little bit of an economic lesson and talk about 4 different phases of the economy. Obviously, we're all painfully aware of the definition of inflation. That occurs when there's a great demand for goods and services while supply is limited. So there's a great demand and very little bit of supply. So what happens is that the prices go up. These dynamics drive up prices. Inflation can get out of control and turn into hyperinflation, which is basically inflation on steroids. This occurs when price increases get way out of control. One of the most used examples of that is the $20 loaf of bread overnight. Then there is stagflation. Now this occurs when inflation remains high, like it is today, and the economy experiences a recession at the same time. And listen, this is what's so ridiculous to me. You've got people on Wall Street, analysts in Wall Street. You've got people on CNBC, which is the big financial network, talking about if we're going to hit a recession and when we're going to hit a recession, when by definition we are in one. But you see, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that we 2 negative quarters of economic growth in a row, January through March, April through June, were negative. That is a recession. But somehow, not this time. This time it's different. Famous last words. So I would argue we are in a stagflation period. Now, the next step is deflation. And this is when the demand for goods and services, which is opposite of inflation, is low and supply is high. So if you got all these widgets and nobody wants to buy them, they have to continue lowering the price of widgets in order to sell them and get rid of their inventory and make money and survive. And the interesting thing about deflation, when we get into that period of time, people hold back from buying anything and they save their money because they feel like the prices will go even lower, so they don't want to buy until they can get a really good deal, even though prices are falling. Like I said, I think we are in the phase of stagflation. Now, if you look at what's causing inflation, you'll quickly come to the conclusion, or at least that's the conclusion I've come to, is that what the Federal Reserve Board is doing to fight inflation is raising interest rates. But there's aspects of the complexity of inflation that keeps prices up that have nothing to do with interest rates. So back to that interest rates in a minute. The complexities of inflation are driven by these green energy policies that the Democratic Party is pushing. They're highly inflationary. They create higher energy prices. High energy prices affects about just everything else, and especially food production. The war in the Ukraine affects global inflation. And then there's still there's still problems, you've heard of the phrase supply chain issues still exist from COVID, although those are, I think, in the 8th inning of the ball game. So as the Fed continues to raise interest rates, it does slow down the economy and I think it will put us into a deeper recession, because once again, I think we're already in a recession. And eventually what this does is this brings the stock market down. This brings the bond market down and causes problems in both markets. And it brings the economy down to where all these other reasons that the complexities of inflation don't really matter, because nobody has any money to spend, nor do they want to spend money. So now you've got supply building and you have a low demand for that supply. So I guess in a roundabout way, yes, raising interest rates by the Fed will ultimately control inflation. But do you want to go down that path of destruction of parts of the economy? How low does it have to go? And yeah, you can get rid of inflation, but it could be pretty ugly. This is the route. I don't know to what degree, but this is the route I think that we go when we end up in deflation. And deflation, I would argue, is something that will clear out a lot of the toxicity, but it's hard to get rid of. So this is what I feel, and there's a lot more that I could talk about, but I'm trying to, in the interest of time, keep it short. If you want a copy of my client letter that I wrote about all this, just send me an email at info@prudentmoney.com and or bob@prudentmoney.com, and I'll send it to you. The bottom line is simply this. We need to be good risk managers. We need to understand the risks that we're taking, and we need to understand and be at peace with that prayerfully considered decision making, and make sure that we are set for what I think is to come. And basically the path I've talked about means that inflation won't be around forever. It'll be forced. Prices will be forced to come down. And it could take on a lot of different phases, a lot of different routes, but mainly I do believe that inflation will ultimately turn into deflation. So our task is to make sure that we are closely in a stewardship relationship with God, that's where we're practicing good stewardship principles and we understand and are comfortable with the risk that we're taking. I know, easier said than done. Something that I think is extremely important to be tuned into, have on our radar, and pray about wisdom. The good news is that we could fix a lot of these huge problems in our economy. And on the other side of this scenario is some really good things. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.